Welcome to 3-Night Weekend, where we prepare you for the weekend to come with the help of gaming industry luminaries. I'm Shane Satterfield, and you can find me on the world's most advanced gaming website, SIFTD, at sifted.net, or on Twitter at Dinfire. If you want to support the show, head to patreon.com/sifted. The show goes live every Friday for our patrons, and the following Monday for everyone else. This week, we talk with Jason Schreier. He built his name writing investigative pieces for Kotaku for a number of years before recently moving to Bloomberg to continue his important work. He breaks more major gaming stories than anyone else, and we're going to find out what makes him tick and how he approaches his work. Hey everyone, welcome to 3-Night Weekend. This week, I am honored to have what I believe is one of the few real journalists in the games industry, Jason Schreier. Welcome to 3-Night Weekend, and thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Hello, thanks for having me, Shane. I think I would dispute that characterization because I feel like there are a lot of people out there doing good work, but I appreciate it.
You know, I'm interested to find out kind of what major you were in college, because a lot of folks who are journalists in the games industry weren't journalism majors, and I wonder if that plays into kind of the environment that we're in. But we'll get into all that. I want to kick things off by learning a little bit more about you when you were younger. Were you into games your whole life? What was your first system you got? How did that kind of all play out?
Yeah, my parents actually had an NES that I think they played or they used or they had
That's
in
awesome.
some capacity before I was old enough to play it. So I was like 2-3 years old. They would stick me in front of this thing. So I've been playing games my entire life. Played all the Nintendo consoles I had, and then I had a PC with like the point and click adventures, LucasArts stuff, and Sid Meier's stuff, Civilization, Colonization, Alpha Centauri. So yeah, I've been gaming my whole life, for better or for worse, with a couple of like break-ish things in between, in that I wasn't keeping up with all the new games necessarily. Like during college, I wasn't keeping up with gaming news and like every single new thing, but I would still play games. I would be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go play some RPGs on my PS2 or whatever, or like World of Warcraft. I played a little bit of World of Warcraft during my college years. So yes, I don't think there was ever really a time in my life when I wasn't playing video games.
Did you know most of your life that you wanted to end up working in the industry, or did it just kind of fall into your lap? You went to NYU, correct?
Yeah, no, I did not. I knew my whole life that I wanted to be a writer, and that was always my goal from the age of 5 onwards. I knew I wanted to write. I had my, I guess, original ambitions as a kid was to write fiction books, and then fell into journalism in high school. Really enjoyed being on my high school paper and like learned a lot about journalism, and like we had some these sessions at Columbia University where we got to like learn about journalism, and that was super cool and influential for me. And then did college newspaper stuff at NYU, and knew from then on that I was going to do some sort of like, wanted to pursue writing in some way or another. Flirted with like screenwriting for a bit as well, but I knew I wanted to be a writer in some capacity. Never occurred to me that I would write about video games in any way, but it felt like a good fit once I started doing it.
So you went to NYU. What was your major at the school?
Yeah, that's a tough question to answer. Tougher than you would think. So I went to a college. NYU is broken up into different colleges. There's like the Tisch for the film and drama and stuff. There's CAS, which is like general studies. I went to a college within NYU called Gallatin, which is the School of Individualized Study, which is like, it's sort of like a create your own major thing, which I thought would be fun. Turned out to kind of be a waste of money and time, but yeah, it is what it is.
I think a lot of people would argue in a lot of cases that college does feel like a waste of money. Relearning a lot of the stuff that I learned in high school and having to pay a lot of money for it was not something I was thrilled with when I went to college. That's for sure.
Yep, but you get that fancy degree. I have it on my wall there. You get the degree, and that's all that matters. But yeah, so I did a lot of, so what that essentially meant was that I had the flexibility to take whatever classes I wanted. So I took film classes, writing classes, programming classes, like all sorts of classes, anything that I found interesting on any given semester, which was cool. I kind of wish I had just picked a normal major and learned something interesting, but it is what it is. I also kind of like was not in an academic mood when I was in college, so I don't think I took advantage. I think this is a whole tangent, but I've long held the belief that going straight from high school to college is a mistake for everybody, and that everybody should be like mandated to have a gap year to just kind of unwind before you go straight from like senioritis to like, oh man, now I'm gonna party all day, and you don't actually like most college students, at least that I know, like never didn't actually take advantage of the educational aspect of college. And I wish that I had, like, I wish I could do that as an adult now and be like, oh man, I want to really study something. And it's a shame. It feels like such a waste of everything, money, time, everybody's potential, to just force people to have to follow this direct path from like high school to college. It just doesn't make sense to me.
I did take a gap year.
Oh, that's smart. Did it help you?
It did. In fact, the reason I took the gap year was because I wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to major in at the time. And I figured I would just spend a year just kind of working a whatever job and just exploring things that I really love to try to figure out which direction I wanted to go. But I will say this, in my senior year of high school, when everyone was like, where are you going to college? Where are you going to college? And I was like, I'm not. I'm taking a year off. I was frowned upon. Like I was, because I was in advanced courses, and everybody that I was in classes with, they were all had their plans laid out. I'm doing this.
Yep.
I'm going to get my master's, and then I'm going to get a job here. And I was just like, I'm taking a year off. Like, I'm just going to breathe, figure out what I really want to do instead of throwing a bunch of money at college. And it worked out very well for me. Although I will say this, I started out in business administration, and that only lasted about 2 semesters before I became a journalism major. It didn't work perfectly for me either. But I did enjoy the time. It was good to just have a kind of a breath after high school. But I was certainly kind of like a pariah among my peers in school.
Yeah, there's a lot of social pressure and parental pressure, depending on your parents, of course, depending on your family. But yeah, there can be a lot of external pressures that like make you feel like you have to go to college right away, right after high school. Yeah, I imagine that's the case for a lot of different people of a lot of different demographics, whether your own parents went to college or whether they're like relying on you to be the first person in the family to go to college. There are a lot of pressures at work here. But yeah, like working for a year not only can like give you some time to unwind, it can also let you save some money instead of having to go into massive debt. And that's the other thing, is that like I was fortunate enough to not have to take out loans for college. My family was able to help me out there, which I'm eternally grateful for. But people who do have to take out student loans just wind up saddled with this debt that chases them for the rest of their lives. And it's just so unfair to make an 18-year-old have to make that decision. And like if an 18-year-old took a year and just did some work and like really started to understand money a little bit more because they were like working full time as opposed to maybe like working over the summer. Like I did retail jobs over the summer, but I didn't really understand like the full time day-to-day work until I actually did it. It would encourage someone to make their college decisions, or to take finances into account when making their college decisions, instead of saying, I'm going to go to the private school because that looks the best, and I'm going to take out however many loans to make it happen because that's what I feel like I have to do. Just even giving them that year, I feel like would help so much when it comes to like letting kids make smarter decisions.
Well, then you get to campus and you walk around and they're just giving away credit cards.
Oh God, yeah.
Where you just walk around, they'd have tables set up where you could just sign your name and get a credit card just like that. Like you just watch everyone getting, they're completely irresponsible. Like, and they're all getting credit cards, and that just adds to the debt and adds to the problem. Having that year, I think, also helps you mature a little bit. You're out of high school, you're not in that kind of peer group for an extended period of time. I think it gives you a new perspective. So I was glad I did it, but I was definitely frowned upon for what I did. And I think that still happens today. I think kids are still dealing with that in 2021. It's the expectation that finish high school, immediately go to college, start making money as quickly as possible. So
no doubt.
I don't know what it's going to take to break that chain, to be perfectly honest with you. Parents, really, I think.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So you graduated NYU and you became a freelance writer. You were writing with some great publications. I'm envious of some of the places you got to write for. Wired was one of the big ones. What was the freelance life like for you?
Well, so what happened was I graduated from college, and then I decided to pursue journalism in freelance form, and I just kind of was like, I don't really know what I want to do. I don't have a full-time job yet. Let me see what I can make work. And I wound up freelancing for a bunch of like local journalism sites. Got pretty sick of covering local governments. Eventually looked around and was like, what could I do that would be interesting? Decided to try writing about video games. I had written in college. I had done a little bit of review work for like a volunteer website, one of those smaller sites that is like making people work for free, which in retrospect is pretty unethical. But that's what I did.
I mean, there's still a lot of sites like that today.
Yeah.
But it does help you get your feet wet. I mean, I think it does serve a purpose.
It does. I wouldn't recommend it to people today. Well, I mean, I don't want to wade into that debate, but yes, I did that a little bit just to get a taste of it. And my payment was like in the form of review copies from websites or from companies. And so I did that a little bit. So I had some experience doing that. Started like pitching stuff, going out there, sending emails to every single person on every single masthead I could find. Got a couple of bites from sites that were willing to just like take on inexperienced freelancers to do random reviews. This was back in the day when like a site like Games Radar would like pay for reviews of random ass Wii games, and I would be like, sure, yeah, I'll play.
The OG Games Radar, because the Games Radar that exists today is a lot different than the one that was around back then. Yeah.
And so the Wired thing, that was actually more of a perma-lance gig. It was more of like, so what happened was I think it was like towards the latter half of 2010, I saw there was an opening up to work for Chris Kohler at what was called Wired Game Life, which was the gaming blog of Wired. And he was looking for a contributing writer. So it would be like, we pay you X. I think it started at $500 a month, like something pathetic like that. We'll pay you $500 a month to write X amount per week, and you'll get to work with me, and it'll feel like you're part of Wired, because you're like part of, it wasn't Slack back then, but it was like, I think it was HipChat or Campfire or something, like one of those old chatting.
But you were in on the editorial meetings every week, and you kind of
learned not that. No, not that level. But it was like I was just working closely with Chris Kohler and other editors there. And anyway, so I applied for that gig and got it, and that was really my break in the industry. That was 2010, so that was me getting my foot in the door. I'd been writing for freelance stuff, Paste and Eurogamer and Joystick and stuff like that. Actually, I don't remember which came first, but that, being at Wired helped me get some more visibility and helped me do some big feature stories that got some eyeballs and helped me do more freelance stuff. So I was still freelancing for other places while I was working for Wired. And since Wired paid me nothing, $500 a month, I'm living in Manhattan, cannot live off $500 a month. What I found was this sweet gig that I wish existed today still. That was essentially, there was a website called Patch, and it was like a hyper-local journalism website. And what they did was they had all these retail listings all across the country, and people would submit them themselves. Like if I work at a store, I'm submitting my retail listing to Patch to include it on the website. And the people who submitted them wrote in like incomplete sentences and didn't have great grammar, et cetera, et cetera. And so they wanted copy editors to go through it all. And so every single week I would get paid something like $500 a week to copy edit like 500 listings or something, or 300 listings or something like that. And it was the easiest job in the world because I'm like a fast reader. I could do it all in like 5 hours while watching football every week. Every Sunday I would just sit there and do it all while watching football. And it was just like, man, as long as I have this gig, I can get away with permanently freelancing. Yeah, because like I was supporting myself. I'm living in the city. I was like on my own. I was not getting help or anything. I was like on my own, and I was, just because I had that gig, I was able to do this. And I don't know if there are any like other, for people who are listening to this and wondering like, how do I get into games journalism, or how do I get into journalism? I wish there were more plum gigs like that, because just having that steady income is what really allowed me to be able to do this full time and really push me, like commit myself to it, and be writing every day and pitching every day and interviewing every day and going through all that hustle. And if I didn't have that, I imagine I would have probably had to find like some job working at a store or something, or some other like job that I could find part-time with flexible hours to do alongside freelancing, and that would have been a lot tougher. So I was very lucky to find this Patch gig because that kept me afloat. And then, yeah, I was at Wired for a couple of years. Wired sent me to my first E3 in 2011. So got to go through that experience. And Wired also allowed me to go to like events in New York, press events, and network with people and meet all sorts of people. And then eventually at some point, I got a call, or I got an email from Stephen Totillo at Kotaku, and we met up for drinks, and he was like, "Hey, I'm going to be taking over Kotaku." He was about to become editor in chief at the beginning of 2012. I would like you to come aboard, and I was like, "Okay." And so that was me jumping in to the world of. I mean, that was essentially like, I guess Wired was my big break, but Kotaku was my first like full-time job in games journalism. Yeah, that was like, okay, you're going to be getting a salary now. You don't have to worry about like freelancing every week and hoping that enough review sites will accept your pitches, et cetera, et cetera. And then, yeah, I spent 8 years there and left last year and went over to Bloomberg, and that's my career path.
Okay, my big question for you is how did you get into the tract of journalism that you're in, investigative reporting? Because, and look, I believe, and I know Steven very well. He worked at Viacom and MTV when I first started working at Game Trailers. I believe that Steven was kind of a big conduit for that he supported that kind of journalism and gave you sort of the leeway to do it. Because I've worked at almost every publication at this point, and very few of them even provided the opportunity to do that. When I started at GameSpot in 2000, there was an opportunity for that to be, and I maybe will disagree on this, but be, in my opinion, a real journalist, actually calling people, doing interviews, following up on leads, writing stories that may sometimes be unflattering. A lot of publications aren't really open to that type of content because generally it takes a lot of time and there isn't a lot of output. And particularly online, where you're kind of on this squirrel wheel where you have to continually keep cranking out content for the audience, a lot of times it's discouraged. How did you manage, one, to find that as kind of your niche, and two, manage to maybe convince Steven that it was a good idea to let you do it?
So a couple things. So first of all, I think that like I don't really believe in like gatekeeping the word journalism. Like I feel like journalism applies to everything. Like if you're writing guides for how to beat the new God of War, you're doing journalism. You're providing a service to readers. You're providing information for people. I think there are just many different kinds of journalism, and all of them are just as valid as the rest. I don't really think that it's necessary to like put one specific type of reporting on a pedestal. That said, I don't think it's a big secret to say that a lot of people get into games reporting because they love games and want to be part of the games industry. And I think there are some other people, who, myself included, who got into it more because they love reporting and just want to do that, and they just find the video game industry really interesting. If I, for like to put it another way, if I were not a video game journalist, I would probably be a journalist in some other beat, like a sports journalist or an entertainer or whatever it is.
I started in sports actually in college.
Yeah,
I was on the sports tract,
Mhm.
and I went to get internships at the Philadelphia Inquirer, and they told me there were 85 students trying to get 2 internships. Because there's like
Sounds
6
about right.
universities in Philadelphia, and everyone's trying to get the internship at the Inquirer. And I was
That
like,
number
wait a
would
minute.
probably be 800 now. So,
Oh, I know. And I
yeah.
was like, wait a minute, like this doesn't sound like a good plan. And so I started looking at other things that I was really passionate about, and gaming was the other thing. And I just, that like the next week, I launched my own gaming website.
Yeah, it's a good. I mean, I think that's a healthy mentality, is to be like, I want to be a reporter and get into this. But so to answer your question, I mean, first of all, when I was at Wired, I was constantly picking up the phone and talking to people because that's what I found most interesting. Like I was fine to like write a review or write an essay or a take or something like that, but the thing that I wanted to do most was talk to people and hear their stories and interview them and quote them and put pieces together for articles about a variety of subjects. And so at Kotaku, I mean, the reason that Steven hired me in the first place was to do that, was to be reporting. That said, it was certainly an adjustment going to the blog mines where you're expected to post X times a day. And it's definitely a tricky balance to figure that out. I was lucky to have supportive people around me like Steven who would help facilitate that sort of thing. and pushed me to do some long form work, and try to break news and stuff like that. I remember being so excited about like one of my first scoops, like a couple of months after I started, about how like Obsidian was making a game that was canceled for the Xbox One. And I remember getting, or at the time we called it the new Xbox Durango. And I remember at the time being really excited about getting that scoop. But yeah, it was less because, I mean, yeah, it was because I was lucky, luck above all, and then it was also because it was something I really wanted to do, and it was just I was super persistent about that sort of thing, and eventually kind of started doing reporting on some of the video game industry's darker sides, which I kind of fell into as well over the course of my time at Kotaku. Started doing broader pieces about layoffs and crunch, and in like 2013 or 2014 we had a whole series that I was shepherding that was called Video Game Layoff Stories, where I would compile stories from developers who would reach out and share their stories, like we're like verbatim, like share what they had to say. And it was really heartbreaking stuff. And
You say they were reaching out to you instead of you reaching out to them. Do you think you had established kind
well,
of...
we did call outs.
Okay.
Well, we said, hey, like share your stories. And it became like an ongoing series where at the top and at the bottom it would say, are you a game developer who's gone through a layoff? Reach out to us for these stories. Or like we would tweet, hey, reach out to us for these stories. So eventually you got people that way. And yeah, the more that I talked to people and the more that I met new game developers and got to know people, the more horror stories I would hear. And it just felt to me like something was really broken in this industry, which is very much still the case. And so I decided to focus on a lot of that stuff. But really, I mean, I never set out to be like, I'm going to be the crusader against such and such topic. It's more that I really wanted to tell stories and inform people and entertain people and do journalism about this industry. And I think that it's impossible to do that without getting into a lot of the darker stuff, because that darker stuff is so prevalent. As much as some people don't want to talk about it, or wish that the actual conversation was about why not talk about all the good things? Why not talk about all the great things people are doing? And I think that like you're kind of putting a blindfold on yourself if you're not really taking the time to look at some of these darker aspects of things and how they can be fixed.
And let's be honest, nobody reads the fluff stories. You can put up a story about
people
all
do.
the great things that Call of Duty Endowment does, and no one will read it.
Well, I don't know. People are reading. That's how a lot of sites are getting all their traffic is posting about the hottest new games and exclusive reveals and stories about what's coming next. I mean, yeah, that's where a lot of games traffic is coming from. There's a lot more positive. People are more.
I'm talking more about like cultural stories.
I don't know. I think that like people are a lot more interested in positive stories than they are in negative stories, despite the general.
I would completely disagree with that. I mean, we run a site where we're an aggregator. I can see the data for every story we put up. Your stories, kajoom. Stories about things in the games industry that are doing good. Nobody reads them.
Well, okay, but that's not. Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends what we're talking about here. I'm thinking of like the hottest news about video games and how awesome the PS5 is going to be or whatever.
I'm talking about reporting stories. Like, this goes back to what I was saying about what I consider like a real journalist versus someone who isn't. To me, a real journalist is a reporter. People reporting news, digging into news, doing interviews, the stuff that you do. Previews, trailers, I don't look at that as reporting or journalism, and I guess we doesn't have to agree to disagree on that. Yeah, people watch that stuff, but if you write a news story about something that the gaming industry is doing that is good, or a person in the industry is doing that is good, or, you know, like I said, the Call of Duty Endowment, which does a lot of great out in our society, no one cares. It's the dark stuff that people want to read, the seedy stuff.
Well, no, I don't think you're right there. I think what you're talking about, but what you're talking about, Call of Duty Endowment, like that's nothing. That's not a story. If you're talking about stories, I mean, every single story, this is something that a lot of people don't really understand about reporting and nonfiction writing and storytelling in general. Every single good story has some sort of conflict or tension in it. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's seedy or dark or like going into the dark underbelly of the video game industry. I wrote a story. I mean, there are tons of good stories about how people defy the odds and get past obstacles to do great things. Call of Duty Endowment is not interesting because it's not a story. It's just like, here's some rich people giving money that's a fraction of their wealth.
But it is a story because a lot of times they'll focus on one person, like an amputee who lost his leg to a roadside bomb.
Yeah, but there's no story to Bobby Kotick's tax write-off, like paying off money to people. Like, that's not a story. If you told me a story about an amputee like working against the odds to figure out how to play video games again, that is a story, and that's an interesting story that people would want to read. If you tell me a story that it's like Bobby Kotick just put together an organization that is the Call of Duty Endowment Fund and gives money to that amputee, there's nothing interesting or there's no tension or drama or conflict or anything interesting about that story. But a story doesn't have to be like about crunch or misconduct or harassment or volatility or anything like that to be an interesting story. You can tell a story about how at this year's GDQ there's a speedrunner who had to deal with his computer getting stolen and had to scrummage up the money to find a new computer and practice every day for 8 hours in order to do this one trick for a speedrun. And that's a great story. It doesn't matter that it's not about something that it's not like, it doesn't need to expose wrongdoing to be a good story. It just needs to have some
Jason,
sort of
I would
tension
argue
in it.
that if you then wrote the story about how you tried to figure out who stole the laptop, that story would do more views.
Sure. I mean, that's part of the greater story. Sure. I mean, yeah, anything
I'm just
that is,
saying
like,
that generally,
trying to solve a
I mean, there's a
mystery.
reason that the phrase "if it bleeds, it leads" exists.
Yeah, no, I agree. Again, it's like you're talking about tension, and ramping up the tension in a given story is always going to make it more interesting. I guess the point that I'm making is that for a story to be really good, it doesn't necessarily have to have wrongdoing.
Oh, I'd agree with that for sure. Yeah.
But wrongdoing makes for the most interesting stories. That's for sure. Like, people want to read a story that has clear heroes and villains. And so I don't like that because I don't think that there are any clear heroes or villains in any nonfiction stories. I guess there are a few exceptions, but yeah, but it's definitely true that the more tension a story has, it's probably going to be more interesting. But the stories that you were talking about earlier tend to be kind of tension free, and maybe they're not even stories, and that's why people wouldn't necessarily care about them, because they're lacking that kind of interesting conflict or interesting tension or interesting stakes that would make something qualify as a story that's worth reading.
Jason, why do you think there are so few people like you in the games industry that do the reporting, that dig into stories, that make the phone calls, that beat the pavement, so to speak? Do you think part of it is because it's an entertainment medium and there's kind of this wall around it? It's very secretive. I think a lot of people maybe feel overwhelmed with trying to crack the wall and get behind it. Why do you think that there are so few people that do what you do?
I mean, I don't think that's true. I think there are plenty of people who are doing some really interesting reporting work that I've been watching for a while. Some younger folks and some older folks, and lots of people doing cool stuff out there on the internet. So yeah, I mean, I disagree.
I think
with the
you're
premise of your
being
question,
overly humble. I'll be honest.
But that's, I mean, I think the answer that question is really money and the lack of money in journalism, in any form of journalism, but especially in the video game world, where so many sites have just run out of money or can barely afford to pay their writers in the first place. There are like 3-4 major video game outlets these days, maybe a few more if you're generous. And
just 10 years ago, there were like 25.
Yeah, but even then, even 10 years ago, they weren't paying like livable wages to people. And these days, you're lucky if you get one of those full-time jobs. I mean, yeah, you've always been lucky if you get a full-time job in journalism. Oftentimes, when you do get that full-time journalism, I mean, you alluded to this before, it's very difficult to convince your bosses, like, hey, I need to take the next 5 days off because I want to report on this story of why Outriders servers couldn't work at launch. And sometimes one of the things you run into in reporting is that like sometimes stories fall apart. Sometimes you can't get the goods. Sometimes the goods aren't as interesting as you thought they would be. Sometimes all those weeks you spent on a story leads to something that is mediocre and only a couple thousand people read, or whatever it is. Like there are all sorts of issues that come up. And if an outlet doesn't have the capacity to pay for that sort of reporting, then it just can't be done. And like, I don't think that I would never say that there aren't people out there who are hungry to report, because I know there are. It's just that it's very difficult to justify it as a writer, as a reporter, if you're being paid like sub minimum wage for your efforts as a freelancer, or if you're full time, or if you're lucky enough to have a full time job and your outlet like won't allow you to do that because you have to contribute to the blog mines and like keep the content mill churning, then that's what you're gonna do. That said, I mean, I see great stuff out of Polygon and IGN and GameSpot. All these places are just commissioning, Kotaku, my alma mater, are just commissioning great stuff all the time. And I'm seeing all sorts of cool reporting and storytelling and blogging and funny stuff and funny essays. And I've been certainly like not unimpressed by the quality of work that I see every day. From my peers and colleagues. And yeah, I mean, I see a lot of people doing good work these days.
Why is no one else breaking stories like you break?
I mean, again, I think there are people breaking stories. I see
come on, Jason.
I do.
You're being way too humble, man.
I really do not like this. It really just has never really
I know you don't want
right
to hear it, but it's the
idea
truth.
of, like,
Again, I run a content aggregating website.
But there
I
are-
see
I mean-
everything that everybody does. Like everything that everybody does. I see it all. And
Okay,
I'm
but I
telling
mean,
you, no one's doing what you're doing.
With the acknowledgement that I disagree with your premise, the answer is the money thing. Like, I mean, that's frankly, that like straight up, that's it.
It's
like,
risk
if
reward,
people
you're
were-
saying?
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't think there are many other people who are lucky enough to be able to tell their bosses, hey, I'm going to go spend the next couple of weeks like researching why Cyberpunk turned out the way it did. And then, I mean, the other part of it is that, like, at a certain point, once you're lucky enough to have gotten to a certain level, you become trustworthy to people, and people know that you'll treat their stories with respect and handle it with care. And I'm fortunate enough that a lot of people have responded to me like that. Oftentimes, when I reach out to people these days about telling their stories, they'll say, "Oh, okay, yeah, I mean, I trust you to do this right." And I'm very lucky that I have gotten people to trust me with that. And I always feel very fortunate when people trust me with their stories. I was just thinking about that while talking.
Jason. That's a reflection of your work. I mean,
yeah, no,
to me, that's not luck at all. That's you.
Well,
look, you probably got a first big break somewhere where someone took a risk and said, "Yeah, I'll talk to you." But then it's up to you to report that accurately and engender that trust with the people that you're working with.
Yes, I mean, certainly, yes. I won't discount. There's definitely skill to it. There's definitely persistence to it. Willingness to be annoying and like not take no for an answer and keep hounding people is certainly a part of it. Willingness to go out and cold call people and just say like, "Hey, I'm a reporter," and kind of you need to put aside your fear of rejection and fear of getting denied or getting embarrassed because someone forwards your message to a PR person and the PR person sends you a nasty email or something like that. That's all part of it. But like, it's impossible to discount how much luck there is. Like the luck, even going back to when I was born, like being lucky enough to be born into a family where like we lived a comfortable life and I didn't have to worry about money. And so I could go to college where I wanted to and could take internships. It was lucky enough to be able to do like unpaid internships during college, and then being lucky enough to get that patch gig that I mentioned where I'm getting $500 a week for doing barely anything, like 5 hours of work. And so that allowed me to like pursue journalism. If I didn't have that gig, like I always think about that, like how lucky I was to get that. Well, yeah, who knows? Like I might not be in journalism. I might have been like, you know what, this is too hard. I don't want to work at like Barnes and Noble anymore. I'm going to go take an office job in like communication somewhere or something like that. Like, who knows? Anything can happen. Also,
life
I was
is
lucky
crazy
enough,
like that.
I was lucky enough to not have gotten rejected from the USC producers program that I applied to after college, which I was thinking, I was like, I had this idea in my head that maybe I would go off to Hollywood and like work in TV or something like that, and got rejected from that. And so I was like, okay, I guess I'll stay in New York and see what's up here. So there's so many, like, I feel like it's like arrogant to discount how much luck there is to like everybody's path in life, and anyone who's successful has to just acknowledge how much luck and privilege there is behind that. And yes, like I'm not denying that there's also skill to it, to
and
like
hard
a skill
work
component. But I think luck is number one. Yes, hard work, definitely. But yes, luck is number one, followed by hard work, followed by skill as like a distant third. But yes,
I'd agree
luck
with that.
and hard work are the two most important things you can have. And I always encourage people like, hey, don't worry about like whether you have talent or not. It's like, that doesn't really matter. Like what you have innately doesn't matter as much as like being lucky, which you can't control, and working really hard, which you can control. And yeah, those are the things that I think matter most.
Jason, how do you feel about influencers, YouTubers, Twitch streamers? You talked earlier about how you feel like a lack of funding from a lot of publications kind of inhibits the kind of work that you do. It seems like those folks have no problem with cash flow. How do you feel about influencers and kind of their effect on the industry, and sort of maybe how they impact what you do as well?
Yeah. It's tough to group all influencers into one kind of category because there's so many different types of YouTubers, doing so many different things. It used to really bug me back in the day, a couple of years ago, that like some channels would just like get hundreds of thousands of views by just like putting a very baity headline and reading my articles out loud. I've kind of gotten over that and come to peace a little bit with that stuff. And
how did
just been like,
you
whatever,
how did
who
you
cares?
approach that back then? Did you do anything? Did you just sit back and stew, or did you?
No, I mean, I just made snarky comments online, which I mean is that's the internet way. But yeah, I mean, I've kind of gotten over that, and I do think there's a lot of like YouTubers out there who do awesome work. Super Bunny Hop comes to mind as someone who I've long admired as a reporter and a YouTube worker. There's a channel called People Make Games by Chris Bratt and Annie, whose last name I'm forgetting. They do really cool stuff. There's a lot of really good stuff on YouTube and Twitch, and I wish that I had more time to like be watching Twitch streamers and like immersed in that world, but it's very much like not my thing, and not something that I've really taken the time to get into. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of good stuff. There's a lot of good and a lot of bad. There's a lot of terrible stuff out there and a lot of really cool stuff out there. Overall, to answer your question, I think that like the real insidious nature of the influencer machine is that it blurs the lines between advertisement and reporting even further than they were already blurred. And in games journalism, in the world of video games, there were always kind of blurred lines there, going all the way back to the magazine days where it was never really clear who was paying who and what was a preview that was editorially driven versus what was ad driven and sponsored by companies. Nowadays it's kind of the same problem where like you watch a video from a YouTuber and it's never really clear who's being paid what to say what they're not allowed to say in exchange for that ad money, who they're afraid of pissing off. And yeah, I mean, I think that is one thing that to give you one of the answers that you're looking for in terms of like what I wish that there was more of in the video game industry. I do wish there was more of reporters in general, YouTubers, anyone in this world, any journalist, anyone who's considered someone who reports information to people, burning bridges with game companies and PR people, and like really being willing to set things on fire and be like, hey man, like I don't care if this PR person blacklists us, I don't care if this company stops sending us codes or stops talking to us, because we're just gonna do this. And I think that can ultimately be like a big influence, is that worry, because we've seen it happen before. Bethesda has blacklisted me and Kotaku for 8 years now, and so that threat, even just knowing that it could happen, I think can influence you in subtle ways. It can make you think twice before saying that thing or reporting that thing or pursuing that story lead. So that's definitely something that has concerned me for a long time, is just like the power imbalance between the game companies that have all this leverage against reporters and the reporters who don't really have a ton of leverage when it comes to working with these game companies, and kind of have to, and that's even more true for the influencer world. You just kind of have to play ball if you want to keep getting that access, keep getting those review codes. And yeah,
a lot of it depends on how big you are. In all honesty, like
it
at Game
does,
Trailers, we would publish scathing reviews from huge publishers, and inevitably, I would get a call from that publisher within the hour where I would have to go through the mental gymnastics with them about it. And then if it escalated beyond that, I'd get a call 2 days later from our marketing department saying, "Hey, this publisher just called and they just canceled all these orders." And I'm like, "Too bad. Sorry. The reason people come to our website and we have a business in the first place is because they trust us." And it can be a hard discussion to have with people who are just Joe marketing person who doesn't understand editorial integrity and how important that can be. But my question is it all that important anymore? Because as you say, you have these influencers in some cases who have millions and millions of people who hang on their every word, yet they have no editorial oversight whatsoever. There's no editor-in-chief there, looking over their shoulder, making sure that they're buttoned up. In a lot of cases, it's just a one-man band. What kind of impact do you think that's had on games coverage?
Yeah, well, so to be clear, I'm not even necessarily talking about negative reviews when I talk about that. I'm talking about other kinds of coverage. Very rare for a games company to blacklist an outlet for publishing a negative review, as opposed to publishing info about an unannounced game, like derailing their marketing plans, or publishing info about exposing bad work conditions at their company. That sort of thing is more along the lines of what I'm thinking of. But yeah, I mean, as far as it's definitely true. I mean, we're seeing that at a broader level too, with the rise of newsletters and the money in Substack these days, where journalists are also going off on their own and not having editorial infrastructure around them, and pursuing independent journalism, and that has its pros and cons as well. I mean, I think fundamentally any journalist who's working without an editor is kind of like has an arm tied behind their back, and is just like missing out on a lot, because editors are extremely valuable and can save you from if you'll pardon the lewd phrase, save you from shooting your own dick off, or whatever genitalia you have, because it's so easy as a reporter to be like to write things and just be like, I'm going to just publish this, and you need those safeguards in place. It's like having it's like having your I have in my kitchen my closets, like the drawers below the sink and stuff, are all baby proofed, and they have these magnet locks, so my toddler who tries to constantly open them can't get in. And I feel like that's the editor journalist relationship, is like the journalist is free to wander around, but like, hey, at a certain point you need that baby proofing, you need that toddler lock to have the editor come in and be like, okay, before we publish this, let's talk about this, and let's talk about what the story means and why it matters, and blah, 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 blah. And some of my worst mistakes at Kotaku, as an example, have been just because I've dashed off a blog post and just hit publish without like running it by people, or like getting any thoughts or anything like that. And yeah, it's something that I think would benefit most people, all people, anyone who's writing on the internet or making videos or anything would benefit from an editor and having someone with experience behind them to support them and show them and help them and guide them, and all of that stuff is like totally invaluable. But yeah, the influences, I'm not really sure what the influences are on a broader scale. It certainly seems like, I mean, I've always believed that like the YouTube world and Twitch world can be complementary to written journalism and will never really replace journalism, because there are always going to be people who just want to read stuff online and don't want to watch 20-minute videos just to get the news of the week or whatever. And yeah, I mean, I think they kind of exist for different audiences and exist for different purposes. So yeah, I mean, I think of like podcasts, for example. There are often people who are like, I listen to 3-hour podcasts and I want my podcasts all to be super long. And then there are other people on my own podcast, Triple Click. We keep our episodes to an hour or less every single week. And we are very much tailored towards an audience who like doesn't necessarily, who maybe only has X amount of time in the week to listen to podcasts and doesn't necessarily want the 4-hour podcast every week. So yeah, I mean, I just think it's different audiences. And one thing where I'm really optimistic and really bullish on is, in terms of the video game industry, is that the number of gamers is just going up and up and up every year. And I use the word gamers, even though I hate the word gamers.
Yeah,
really,
me too. I try to
video
never
game
use
audience,
it ever. Yeah.
I should avoid that. The video game audience is just going up and up and up every year. And like there are more people
I use players
than ever before. Players, yeah. There are more people playing games than ever before. And with that, I think comes more opportunities for media people and more opportunities to reach new people and to expand your audiences and to hit different audiences and to reach to like people who to create like podcasts and YouTube channels and websites that are tailored for communities that are maybe like underrepresented, minority communities and other people who maybe like don't get to see themselves as much in like mainstream press. And it just feels like there's more and more opportunities than ever. And I just wish that their journalism could figure out how to get money out of that, because the audiences are bigger, but the ad money is going down and down and down. So hopefully one day, hopefully people smarter than I am will figure out how to make money from these massive gaming audiences.
Well, to that point, I mean, first of all, I just want to thank you because your stories have helped us get out episodes of our podcast, because there's some weeks where there's just, no, I'm not kidding. There's some weeks where there's just nothing happening and one of your stories will break and it'll end up becoming a topic in Game Face that Matt and I will talk about for like 45 minutes. And I'm not the only one. This is happening all over the internet. I think we all owe you.
Happy to be a content
We all owe
provider
you gratitude for saving our butts over and over again.
Very welcome.
But how does it feel, though, to know that you publish a story, which, and we'll get into like your move to Bloomberg here in a little bit, but it's published on Bloomberg, and I'm sure it does a lot of page views. But then you see some YouTuber talk about your story that you wrote, and it does 2 million views. He probably generated a huge amount of revenue off of that. How does that feel?
Yeah, I mean, it used to bug me a lot more than it does now. I've tried to be more at peace with it and more serene about that sort of thing, because it's like, I mean, I can't control it, and so what's the use in getting upset about it? I mean, yeah, it doesn't really bug me that much. I think that, so one of the reasons that I've kind of come to be at peace with it is because most of the time, it would bug me if they didn't like say my name or give me any credit,
which we do every single time.
Yeah, and so I think that like as long as people are crediting properly, I think even if they might, who knows how much money they're making, but like even if they're making money, that doesn't really bother me as long as they're giving credit when it's due. But like oftentimes it's not really like my place to worry to like I try not to make it an ego thing, because even though it is my story, quote unquote, we're talking about reporting other people's stories, and fundamentally it's what really matters here is like getting word out there about some things and telling the stories and like helping them find catharsis and helping inform people and getting readers the real story behind certain things, or like getting readers access to info they might not otherwise have. And yeah, I mean, there's certainly like ego plays into it, and I would be lying if I didn't tell you that I didn't enjoy like seeing my story go up because I get credit and attention for it. But it also, I think, is important to just like for more and more, for as many people as possible to know some of this stuff. And so if it can be amplified through wider audiences and if they're giving proper credit, then okay, cool. I mean, yeah, like, so I have a new book coming out called Press Reset. I can't believe we've gone 50 minutes without me mentioning this.
Well, I wanted to leave it for the end so people remembered it.
No, well, I was going to say it's to your credit as an interviewer that you got me off my talking point of the book, which I wanted to bring up. Yeah, so I have a book coming out called Press Reset, and I fully expect that like some YouTuber would like summarize a story from it or something like that. But like my feeling is that if even if a tiny fraction, even if like 1% or 2% of the people who watch that video go out and get the book, then it's probably worth it because you're reaching an audience that you wouldn't reach otherwise. And so it's the same with like any story. If someone makes a YouTube video and it has 2 million views about one of my articles, and 2% of those people, so what is it, 20,000 people, hear my name and think, oh, Jason Schreier, like I should go follow him, I should go check out his work, I should go read his stuff on Bloomberg, then it's worth it. So I've tried to like,
basically.
yeah, so like if you had asked me this 2 years ago, I'd be like, God damn it, it's so annoying. Like I should get all the credit, blah, blah, blah. But like I've tried to reorient my thinking to be more like, okay, let's see what the positive side of this is. So yeah, that's kind of my stance these days.
Okay. So you just recently broke the story about the crazy kerfuffle at Sony Bend and with Days Gone 2 and all that stuff. And then David Jaffe, former game developer, prominent game developer, almost created like a little cottage industry off of your story. Does that kind of stuff bother you? I did hear on a podcast you kind of sniped him a little bit. And
yeah, it's like, I mean, a couple of years ago, I might have been a lot more annoyed than I am now. Now I feel like it doesn't feel like something that I on the Min-Max podcast, which is what you're referring to, something I talked about a little bit. Actually, I think this was another interview with Ben Hansen. I was talking a little bit about how like once you become prominent and you hit a certain level of like success and quote unquote fame, whatever that means, you kind of have to treat your presence differently than you might have in the past, and that's been something of a hard lesson for me to learn, but it's something I've been trying to think about every single day. Is like, look, is it punching down for someone like me to be like, oh, David Jaffe, blah blah blah? And I think it is, and so I'm kind of like, well, all right, I'm just not going to pay any attention to this and just not let it annoy me. And yeah, sometimes things will creep out, like taking a little snipe and being like whatever, but I'm just trying to be in this kind of serene place where I'm just like, I don't really care about this, and I'm just gonna continue trying to do the work. And what bothered me was that there was like there was misinformation being spread at certain points, and there was like, for some reason, a bunch of people started saying like, oh my God, Days Gone 2 really is in development. And I was kind of like, no, that's not true. Like, I haven't had time to watch the video, but if someone said that, it's not true. And it turned out that they didn't actually say that. And so that part of it, I felt like I had to clear up. But in terms of just like critiquing what this guy wants to do with his YouTube channel, I mean, I'm just like, I don't really care. Like, I'll just block him on Twitter so he doesn't annoy me and just move on with my day. Like, Twitter blocking is really the most essential part of how I stay calm and stay kind of sane on the internet. It's just like getting people out of my social media life and just like, I think of it as gnats, like swatting gnats with a fly swatter. And it's so satisfying to do also, is just like blocking people on Twitter who annoy me. And so that's something that I just try to do quite a bit and keep people out of my life if they're like console fanboys or like people who are trying to rile me up on Twitter for whatever reason. And yeah, so that's my mentality, is just like, okay, I'll block David Jaffe on Twitter and then just move on. And I don't really care. I'm just not going to pay any attention or give it much time.
That actually segues nicely into my next question, which is, what is the biggest misunderstanding about your work and what type of feedback bothers you? Because obviously you're working in games. There are other things that you could cover as a journalist where you wouldn't have to deal with sort of the younger audience who maybe is more likely to fly off the handle, a little more impulsive. What is it about your job and your work that is most misunderstood, and what kind of feedback kind of drives you crazy about what you do?
One thing that drives me crazy.
You can say that in like 5 minutes or less.
Yeah. Well, one thing that drives me crazy, just one example. I mean, there are a lot of things that bother me, but one thing that drives me crazy is seeing people like on Reddit and stuff say, well, Jason Schreier said this, and I didn't actually say anything like that. And I have to resist the urge to like go around to every Reddit comment like responding to people, because it would just be such a waste of time. But yeah, that's something that bothers me a little bit, but I've just kind of had to accept it. Again, it's like you hit this point where where your platform is a little bit bigger and you've become a little bit better known, and you just kind of have to deal with all the blessing and the curse that is, the pros and cons that come with that. And one of the cons is that like you can't control what people are spreading publicly, what people are spreading privately, what people are saying, what people are misunderstanding, what rumors people are sharing that are half true or not true at all, what exaggerations people are sharing. It's just kind of like you have to kind of deal with all of that, and it certainly
can be very, very frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, it would really.
It's hard.
Again, I try to like. I try to take that mentality of like, I'm just gonna zoom out and not really let it bother me, because people aren't really thinking of me as a person. They're just thinking of me as this character in their minds. And that's oftentimes how people deal with prominent people on social media, people who have a certain following or a certain clout on social media, is that they just treat those people like they're characters for their amusement. And so
An avatar.
Yeah, I mean, I just block and move on if I need to, and occasionally I'll correct the record if I really need to. Like if I see a bunch of people misinterpreting something, although sometimes if a bunch of people are misinterpreting something I said, then I should have said it better in the first place. So I'll try to make me a couple of that. But yeah, I mean, it is what it is.
That's been a challenge for me working online for the last 20 plus years. And it doesn't hit me until a relative or something digs up something online and they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe what they're saying about you. And they're like devastated. And I'm just like, oh, really? Like, that's like the billionth thing that someone has said horrible about me online. We live in this different world from a lot of people, and it can be hard to adjust to it at first, I think, for a lot of folks.
I have a question for you, Shane.
Sure.
Since we're talking about games media, how is SIFT doing? Are you guys like able to make consistent revenue off aggregation? What's your business model been like these days?
We generate no money off aggregation. We don't run any ads at all. It's basically just a service to the community at large. We're looking at changing that. We're looking at running ads soon. But even if we do that, then folks who are our patrons or our subscribers would not be seeing ads if they choose not to. Some people are like, I want to see ads. I just want to support you.
Got it. I didn't realize. So you guys are subscriber based, right?
We
now
are.
I'm remembering
yeah.
that you guys have a subscription model.
Yeah. So when we launched, we had an on-site.
How is that doing? How is that doing for you? How is that doing for you guys?
It's been tough the last 12 months. We've lost a lot of subscribers since the pandemic started. We were doing great up until about 18 months ago. And when we launched, we had an on-site subscription service, and a lot of our subscribers were like, I want to give you more than what you're asking per month. So would you launch a Patreon where I can just give you however much I want? So we have that. We have our on-site subscription service as one revenue stream. We have our Patreon as another revenue stream. We have YouTube revenue as another revenue stream. And we also have a big program for Twitch Prime where people subscribe to our Twitch channel with Twitch Prime, which is free for them. And then they get Pactor Factor, which is one of our bigger shows, a week earlier than people get it on YouTube. So I think any modern publication, if you want to survive, you need all those separate revenue streams. And we have merch, and it's like you have all these streams, and for some companies it may be extremely large. For us, they're modest, but when they all add up and come together, we just had our 5th anniversary last year. So I wish it was doing better than it is. I'll be honest with you. Content aggregation, even though our site does something that no other content aggregator does, it's still a hard sell because so many people just want to get their news from Twitter. That's really what's become the problem, is getting people off of Twitter to come to SIFTD and use SIFTD as a content aggregator. And I don't use Twitter for news aggregation at all, because I use SIFTD, and I think it's the superior way to do it. But it's muscle memory. People are just used to just waking up in the morning, opening up Twitter. Maybe they see stuff, maybe they don't see it.
Well, Twitter's also fast. That's a big advantage. Twitter is faster than anything else. Like
it's always going to be, because anybody can report.
If you're the type of Right, but if you're the type of news junkie who wants things as soon as they happen, you're going to see it on Twitter even before your New York Times alert hits your
Yep.
phone. You're going to see it on Twitter first.
If you're
So
following the right
that,
people.
I think, is the big advantage. Yeah, well, yeah, most people kind of know how to curate these days to follow their favorite journalists and stuff.
Yep.
But yeah.
And Sifted, I mean, I'm not sure if you're aware of what it does, but you tell us what you care about and you get a custom feed of content. So it also cuts out all the
I've seen
noise
it
that you
in
don't
Twitter
want
a
to
little bit of it.
see. So there are advantages to it,
Mhm.
but we have limited marketing dollars. So most people don't even know Sifted exists.
Right.
Let's be honest. Like,
Right.
as you
Right.
said, the gaming audience is gigantic. I would guess 1/100th of 1% of players know that Sifted even exists. That's
Right.
really the big challenge.
Right.
But anyway, we've survived. I
Yeah.
started a business that's now run for 5 years. I'm pretty proud of that. It hasn't
It's
been as
pretty
big
cool.
or
Yeah, it's
successful as
pretty
I
cool.
thought it would be when I had stars in my eyes when I launched it. But I'm very happy that I've managed to launch a business that's kept me employed for 5 years. And
Yeah, the fact that you can make a living off of your own business is impressive.
It's been
Incredibly
hard.
impressive.
I mean, it's a lot of hours. But we're games journalists. We work long hours. It's just what we do. I don't know why it is, but I've always worked 70-hour weeks. It's
Well,
just what I
all
do.
journalism is a very intense profession. I mean, that's always been the case.
There's no on or
the
off
news never
hours
stops.
in journalism. Yep, that's the way it
Yeah.
is. Well, let's get back to you though. This is all about you, Jason. So as you said, you left Kotaku.
I can't resist the urge to ask people questions. Even
Well, you're a
when I'm being
journalist.
interviewed.
Absolutely. So you left Kotaku last April. I was surprised to see this, but not incredibly surprised because I was kind of in tune with what was going on over there with Gawker and the big court case.
Well, the
that happened,
Deadspin thing is
and
really
the
what
Deadspin
happened.
thing.
Yeah.
So I wasn't that surprised that you left Kotaku, but I was kind of surprised where you went from Kotaku. You went over to Bloomberg, which is more of a, I don't want to say a mainstream outlet, but a more general outlet. It's not games focused. Why did you make the decision to go to Bloomberg versus going to an IGN or a GameSpot? Because in my opinion, like if I had the money to hire you, I would have thrown the bank at you to hire you. And I'm sure the EICs at these other publications probably wanted to hire you as well. Why did you decide to go to Bloomberg?
So when I was deciding to leave Kotaku, I reached out to a bunch of places that interested me most and that I thought would be good fits for in a variety of ways. And at the end, it came down to Bloomberg and one gaming outlet, and I was torn. There was a lot of compelling reasons to pick the gaming outlet, and a lot of people I respected there and wanted to work with, and thought were really awesome. But fundamentally, I was like, all right, which of these experiences is going to be completely new and teach me new things and like help me develop my skills in a new way? And the answer to that was going to a mainstream outlet where you're writing in a completely different way for a completely different audience than something that I think would be more along the lines of like, okay, this is more of what you were doing at Kotaku, and now you can keep doing that, which is writing about games for a very gamer audience. And to me, just the challenge of doing something completely new and doing something that was like going to teach me new things and gonna have me be surrounded by like all these talented journalists at Bloomberg and the newsroom here and the tech team here, that was the number one factor and like the most compelling reason to take this job. And it's been awesome. It's been really fascinating learning from people and honing new skills and learning new things. And it's been really cool.
What do you think has been the biggest thing you've learned since moving over to Bloomberg?
It's not like one thing. It's more like, okay, this is how we do a story, and this is what a story looks like here, and this is what the nut graph looks like here, as opposed to something that is like, okay, here's a good example. The Sony story you mentioned before. If I were at Kotaku, that probably would have been a story that was just about VASG and what happened there, and the story of their Last of Us remake and how it fell apart, and this little service studio, or not little, but the service studio that tried to start a little team to make games and how and why it failed. at Bloomberg, that's not a story because it's not something that the Bloomberg audience would be super interested in. So it had to be more of a, let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture for Sony, and let's bring in some other stuff and look at some other ideas here and try to come up with more of a central thesis and look at the big picture of what this all means for PlayStation. And so that is like the perfect example of like the things that I'm doing a little bit differently at Bloomberg. And yeah, it's been fun. Like, one of the things that I have to do every single day is talk to my editors who aren't necessarily gamers or aren't in tune with the gaming community, and explain to them why things in our kind of insular industry matter, what really is important here, what the stories are, what the interesting narratives of this industry are. And that has been just a really interesting challenge and been fun to do, to just have those conversations and try to be a window for the video game industry for my editors who just have not care or like don't pay attention to this the way that I do.
Sounds like what my job was like working with C-level execs at Viacom, trying to convince them to get on board with gaming initiatives, having to break it down to the very basics of what the industry is about and why it matters. Do you think that publications like Bloomberg are more open, though, to that type of content at this point? You think it's evolving?
Yeah, I mean, they hired me to
Right.
be a games writer and to do this sort of stuff that I've been doing. So yes, 100%. I think we're a long way from like every single mainstream outlet having a video game section the way that they have a film section or sports section, but hopefully that comes soon. I think there have been hiccups along the way and some ill-fated initiatives at mainstream sites to like try to do game stuff that just didn't work out. But then there's some great stuff, like the Washington Post has their launcher blog now that is great and apparently really successful for them, which makes me really happy. And I would love to see more mainstream outlets doing that, because yeah, I mean, people hear that the video game industry is $180 billion a year and they're like, wait, what? Games? You mean like Fortnite or whatever? My kid plays that. I think part of it also is that like a lot of these legacy publications and mainstream media places are run by people who are maybe older generations and didn't grow up playing games. And as those of us who did grow up playing games start entering our 40s and 30s and start like graduating up to those roles and maybe taking over these sites, then I think these sites and these papers will start paying more heed to video games, taking games more seriously. So we'll see.
I've noticed that when you publish articles on Bloomberg, often you follow up on Twitter with more context and texture that the story didn't include. Do you feel like you need to do that more now with Bloomberg than you had to at Kotaku? Would you have more freedom to include those details in the articles on Kotaku than on Bloomberg?
Yeah, it depends on the story. Some of my stories, for a variety of reasons, we've had to cut out some details that I would have liked to include in there. But yeah, I mean, sometimes it's like I said, it's always this conversation, this back and forth of like, okay, well, this is something that the gamers who follow me on Twitter would care about, but it's not something that like our Bloomberg audience would necessarily care about. So there's very much a back and forth, a balance of like trying to figure out what matters here, what doesn't. Does it matter that the reason Naughty Dog has taken over and has people working on The Last of Us 1 remake is because it's a good fit for them as far as where they are in the console generation and like getting into the nitty gritty there. I don't know if that would be super appealing to a Bloomberg audience, but for the gamer audience that follows me, it would be super interesting. And yeah, there have been a couple of cases, most notably Cyberpunk, where I've had to cut a lot out of the article that I didn't want to cut out, but I think there were extenuating circumstances there for a variety of reasons. And then the flip side of that is that we've actually published a few big features over the past year and delve into games that I think are full of great details. We published a big story a couple of months ago about Amazon and their failed attempts to get into gamings. My colleague Priya Anand and I published this big story about that. We did a big story last year about Ubisoft and their executives and the misconduct that was happening there. That was full of details, didn't need to know clarification afterwards. So we do have a lot of stuff like that as well. But that sort of story tends to be months and months and sometimes weeks of lead time, months of reporting, sometimes weeks of lead time, as opposed to a story that is more like, okay, we need to get this out quickly, so we need to cut here, do this, do this, do this, and it goes through various layers of editing. Bloomberg has a lot of layers of editing, which most mainstream outlets do, which is not something I was used to, because at Kotaku it was like, I write a story, Steven, usually I send it to him for an edit, and then we get it up on the page. At Bloomberg, there's a very different process, and it goes through a lot of different people. We have like dedicated art people and photo people and copy editors and stuff like that. So there's a whole big, it's a whole production.
Do you have to send your content through a legal department there?
Depending on the story. Some stories, yeah. Especially stories involving sexual misconduct and accusations against people. Last year when we were covering some sexual misconduct allegations, we had to go through legal for sure. But we did that at Kotaku also. We had a whole legal department where I would constantly be running stories past them, and they would give us notes and tell us what to include or not include. I did the same thing for my books also. It's just a smart thing to do as a journalist, is to run sensitive stories by your lawyers.
I don't know that that's happening a lot in the rest of the industry.
Well,
we did it at Viacom because they were just crazy paranoid about being sued. And
but how many? I mean, not a lot of other stories are out there like
that tackle that
running
topic,
out
that type of
running.
topic.
Yeah, I mean, running sexual harassment allegations or anything like that. Like oftentimes that stuff is broken first on Twitter or on elsewhere on the internet, as opposed to like a big gaming site. Like I don't think I can probably count on one hand the number of times that a big gaming site has been first to break the news of some sort of serious crime accusation. So I don't know how often they would even have to deal with their lawyers. But yeah.
Let's talk about your books, because writing books has become a big part of your life. Your first book was called Blood, Sweat, and Pixels. Excellent book. Very compelling read. It's one of those books, before I started to read it, I didn't have high expectations, and then I basically plowed straight through it and read it from...
You didn't have high expectations? Wow, that's so rude.
It's no offense to you. I've tried to read a lot of video game books in the past, and I'll be honest with you, most times I cannot finish them. Your first book... no problem. I did get it in advance of your brand new book called Press Reset, and it comes out on May 11th. Is that correct?
Yep.
I have not finished it yet. I'm only probably about a third of the way through. Just as compelling. I'm going to finish it, absolutely. Probably go right through it this weekend, plow through it. What is it like trying to separate your reporting life from writing books? And how do you decide the stuff that goes in your book versus the stuff that you actually report?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. A lot of reporters who write books have to deal with that exact question and have to, sometimes on a national scale. Like there was a whole big controversy last year about, was it Woodward or Bernstein? It was Woodward, I think, one of those two, who saved like some quotes from Trump about the pandemic that were pretty wild. Saved him months until his book came out. And so yeah, there's a lot of controversy surrounding that very question. Like, as a reporter, what are you obligated to share versus what you can save for the book? So with my first book, it was pretty cut and dry. I was going around and interviewing people, going to companies, interviewing people there. It was very clear that this was for the purpose of the book. And what I did was, once I finished each chapter, I would have some stuff that like was on the cutting room floor that didn't make it into the book. And so I could turn some of that stuff into Kotaku articles in a variety of ways. With the second book, again, I mean, I knew exactly, like when I'm doing an interview for the book, it's very specifically for the book. I tell the person involved, hey, I'm talking to you for a book. And so they have no expectation that their words will also appear on Kotaku or Bloomberg or whatever. This was all during Kotaku, the reporting for Press Reset. It was mostly finished by the time that I left Kotaku last year. So yeah, so it was very much like me just making separate. It was very easy to separate because I knew very specifically what I wanted to do and the stories I wanted to tell in the books and how I was going to separate them from my day-to-day writing and reporting. So yeah.
What about your editor, Steven Totillo? Had he ever had a conversation with you where he's like, hey, are you like holding back stuff from Kotaku to include in your book? You ever have a discussion like that?
No, never.
Okay.
Because there's so much value to writing books that, like, if you run a website, having an author who writes books brings a lot of value for all sorts of reasons. I mean, prestige is one of them, but also like the number of people I met and was able to talk to and connect with for my book just helped open all sorts of doors for Kotaku reporting.
Right.
So
It
it's
pays
just
dividends
super.
for Kotaku down the line.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like it's very beneficial in a lot of different ways. So it's not something that I don't think he would ever complain about that anyway. Also, I think if it was like if I was clearly not delivering on something, or like if I wasn't like
Missing
working
deadlines,
or
things like
something,
that.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, I wound up taking off time to write the book anyway, so I was off in my own little book bubble for a couple of months writing and reporting for that. So it was very, very kind of separate from my Kotaku work.
How long does it take for you to write one of these books?
It depends. Both books I've written so far, have taken like a couple of years each. With Press Reset, the story is a little bit convoluted because it started off as a different idea and then morphed into what it is now, which is, I should say, a book about game studios shutting down and volatility in the video games industry. And so I would say the bulk of like research, writing, reporting took about 2 years, and that's like a general good rule of thumb, is that like one of my books has taken me each of my books has taken me about 2 years.
That's a lot of work. Is it rewarding and worth it in the end?
Yeah, when I say 2 years, I don't mean 2 years of nonstop work. I mean 2
Sure,
years
but
of
it's a
like,
2-year project,
okay,
essentially, getting stuff done when you can.
yeah. Yeah. And then having scheduling and time for each book, and if I write another book, I'll do the same thing. I fit in stuff when I can for reporting, and then I do most of the writing over the course of like 2 months, where I just am nonstop writing and working for those 2 months. Yeah, it's definitely worth it for me. It's been rewarding. Not really financially. I mean, the money is fine. It's like a supplement to normal salaries, but books don't make a lot of money, despite what people may believe. Even bestsellers don't make a lot of money.
Really?
But
Even with
I just
readers
love
and things like that, Kindles and stuff like that. I'm surprised to hear that, honestly.
Yeah, it's
Is
not a
Kindle like
lucrative
Spotify,
business.
where you're getting like 1/10 of a penny per like read, things like that?
No. You're
Better than
selling
that.
ebooks and you
Okay.
get X% of them. It's just that there isn't that much money in the first place. I mean, if your royalty rate, depending on what your royalty rate is, you might be making like a dollar or two per book copy sold or something like that. Depending, it all depends.
You
a lot.
negotiate all that stuff.
It's nice to have it's consistent. So like Blood, Sweat, and Pixels, I still get a nice check every few months for my royalties on that book, and I imagine the same thing will happen for the second book. But again, none of this is I would not be able to live off if I quit my job tomorrow. I would not be able to live off my book money. I would have to find another source of income to live. But it's nice. I mean, I can't complain about it. But the real reason to do it for me is that it's just really rewarding to write a book and have it in my on my bookshelf and in print, and be able to like dig deep into stories in a way that you can't really do online. And something that really excites me about that is just being able to explore territory and have this like impact on people and resonate with people in a way that you can't really do with an article. Just books are a special thing, and I've been a voracious reader my whole life, and always wanted to write books. So for me, it's just really cool to do, and the money is very much secondary. The number one is just the impact that it has.
How about a tease for something you think from Press Reset that may kind of catch fire on the internet, just to get people excited for May 11th?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff that'll catch
Without
fire.
spoiling
I
it,
think
obviously,
people will-
but maybe a hint at something that people are going to their eyes are going to get a little wide when they read about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is going to resonate with people, and I think people will leave it thinking like, oh my God, this industry is broken. Something needs to be fixed here. And I hope that the right people read it, and I hope that it leads to something. But yeah, I think people will really be shocked at like the amount of volatility and how unstable it is to work in such a lucrative industry. And just seeing some of these stats about how many jobs people have to have and people moving across the city or burning out, and seeing some of these stories, I think will really, really have an impact on people.
The human element.
I'm sure there'll be people. Yeah, the human element, I think, will resonate with people the most. I'm sure there will be people out there who come into it being like, I really want to know the story of like what happened with BioShock Infinite and how Irrational shut down, or like I want to know how Visceral, maker of Dead Space, shut down and what happened there, or how Kurt Schilling's studio, 38 Studios, how that lost $150 million and collapsed in this glorious fashion and left all these people stranded and unemployed and out of money, and how they screwed over, how Kurt Schilling turned into this right-wing internet troll and stuff like that. So I'm sure that'll make some waves as well. But I think fundamentally my hope is that what resonates with people here is that like is the human stories, and I hope they leave the book knowing some names of people who maybe they didn't know before, and thinking like, oh man, that person has a really interesting story. I should follow them on Twitter and I should keep up with their story or something like that. That to me would be really cool if people leave with those stories resonating.
So again, that comes out May 11th. Everyone go out and get it. Jason, before we let you go, we have one thing we do with every guest on 3-Night Weekend. Let us know what you're playing, what you're watching, and what you're drinking this weekend.
Okay, so what am I playing this weekend? I'm probably going to play Returnal. That comes out on Friday, right?
Yeah, I'm really excited
so I'll
for
probably
it.
buy that and play that this weekend. Fortunately, we're my parents are taking my toddler for the weekend, so I'll actually have some gaming time. I won't be
That's perfect.
chasing her around all day. So I'm very much looking forward to that. What am I watching? My wife and I have been rewatching all of Seinfeld, so
Wow.
we're probably gonna get some more into that. We might watch a movie on Saturday night, since again no baby, so we can get away with being like, hey, let's go watch a movie. And what am I drinking? I'm not a big drinker. My drink of choice is like seltzer, so that's what I'm drinking: water and seltzer and coffee. Occasionally I'll have like a glass of wine with dinner or something like that, but like I'm not a big like beer connoisseur or anything like that, or liquor. We rarely have liquor, but maybe I'll have some white wine to celebrate the baby-free weekend.
Jason, where can people find you on social media? How can they connect with your new book? Give us all the deets.
Yeah, so people should check out the Triple Click podcast, which is a podcast I do with my buddies Kirk Hamilton and Manny Myers. If you listen to me talk and you think, this guy sounds interesting, I should listen to him every week, then go check us out, Triple Click. And people can find Press Reset in any bookstore, preferably your local indie bookshop, because I love supporting the indie guys. But you can buy it anywhere. You can buy it on ebook. You can buy it on audiobook. So go check it out. May 11th, Press Reset, Ruin and Recovery in the Video Game Industry. I think it's pretty good. I put a lot into it, and I think people will really like it.
And your personal Twitter handle, if you want to give it out.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's Jason Schreier. Nothing special.
Okay. Jason, thank you so much. I just want to let you know before we go, I truly admire the work that you do. If you couldn't tell from our conversation, I think you're an invaluable part of the industry, and we need people like you for a multitude of reasons. I also want to thank you on behalf of everyone who does a gaming podcast for providing us with ample fodder to get us through the dry spells. This truly has been an epically dry beginning of the year. So your stories have really got us through a lot. I really appreciate it. And thanks again for taking some time to talk with us.
Thank you for having me, Shane.
All right. Now that we know what Jason is doing with this weekend, let's figure it out for ourselves.
Games!
Ooh, it's a big Friday for games people. We got 2 huge games coming out today. First up is Returnal, a PlayStation 5 exclusive, which is something we could all use more of. It's the next game from the team behind Resogun, except this time it's a roguelike 3D game where you play as a woman who's been marooned on a strange planet. Initial reviews have been sky high, but just keep in mind with these games, you have to play the same stuff over and over again. Next up is new Pokemon Snap. Yep, we've finally got a sequel to the N64 cult hit.
Reviews for this game have also been extremely high. People are saying it's much better than the original in almost every conceivable way, and it is a Switch exclusive. If you miss the old school shmups from the arcade days, R-Type Final 2 is also landing this weekend. It's available for PC, PS4, Xbox One, and Switch. A lot of people consider R-Type the best of the genre. And then finally, if you're looking for something maybe a little more aggressive, Terminator Resistance lands on the PlayStation 5.
TV and film.
It's not a huge weekend for TV and film, unless you're us, because there's one thing that we really like that's coming back. But first, The Mosquito Coast Season 1 lands on Apple TV this weekend. It follows a brilliant inventor as he moves his family to Mexico while on the run from the U.S. government. Next up, The Innocent Season 1 appears on Netflix this weekend. It follows an ex-con who went to prison for breaking up a fight, and his struggle to return to normal life is interrupted by yet another crisis. And then finally, something we're really excited about, and you probably don't care about, but you should. Bering Sea Gold comes back this weekend for Season 13. It is our guilty pleasure on television. We never miss an episode of this show. Maybe we're crazy, maybe not. Give it a watch. And then finally, Tom Clancy's Without Remorse premieres on Amazon. It is a standalone film based on the popular books and some might say the video games.
Music.
Lots of big indie albums released today, and we're going to run them all down, although there is one classic punk band that's also coming back. First up, Crumb. Its new album is called Ice Melt. They're an ethereal indie group with electronic beats and shimmering female vocals. It's a perfect chill-out album as you share a couple late-night drinks with your vaccinated friends. Its first album from 2019 was a critical darling, so definitely check it out. Next up, a band called Dawn Richard. The new album is called Second Line. It's an album comprised entirely of electro house, but at the same time, it provides an eclectic mix of different tones. It's downbeat one song and dancey the next, just don't expect many vocals. And here we are at the seminal punk band that returned today with a brand new album, Dropkick Murphys, Turn Up That Dial. The first album from the Irish punk band in quite a while. They were legends back in the day. And while the new album is maybe at least a little bit less angry, it's still not without teeth. For example, the lead single is called Middle Finger. So yeah, you get the idea. And lastly, Teenage Fan Club releases a brand new album today called Endless Arcade. This indie band was underground even by indie standards back in the day, but its legend has grown since then. The new album has an 82 Metacritic average, which is really high if you don't check Metacritic a lot, and it features the same breathless vocals and catchy songwriting from its glory days, but explores some new genres with an eclectic mix of songs.
Sports.
Unless you've had your head in the sand or you're living under a rock, this weekend is all about the NFL draft. It actually kicked off yesterday on Thursday, but it's continuing Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. It's a 4-day event. Everyone's going to be talking about it. Will I watch it? Probably not. Next up is the Valspar Championship. It starts on the Golf Channel and then moves to CBS for the rest of the weekend. Moving to Saturday, plenty of soccer to whet your appetite. Premier League is on NBC Sports Network at 7:25 and 9:55 a.m. However, the teams have yet to be announced. And then Premier League shows up on NBC proper at 12:30, and that's Chelsea versus Fulham. If you're a hockey fan, the Penguins take on the Capitals on NHL Network at 7 o'clock. It is a battle for first place in the Eastern Division. Let's go, Pens. If you want to watch some NBA on Saturday, the Golden State Warriors take on the Houston Rockets at 7:30 p.m. on ESPN. And then the Nuggets take on the Clippers at 10:05. On to Sunday, the lazy day, where I'm guessing a lot of us are either going to be playing Returnal or new Pokemon Snap. But if you're not and you want to check out some sports, the Premier League again is on NBC Sports Network at 8:55 and 11:25 a.m. But again, the teams are TBD. The F1 Portugal Grand Prix is on ESPN at 9:55 a.m. If you want something a more left-hand turny, the NASCAR, and this is funny, Bushy McBush Race 400 is on Fox Sports 1 at 3 p.m. And then in the NBA, the Nets take on the Milwaukee Bucks. Should be a battle for the top of the Eastern Conference. That's at 3:30 on ABC. And then in Pucks, the Tampa Bay Lightning take on the Detroit Red Wings on NBC at 3 p.m. And then finally, cap off your night with something really slow and probably boring. It's Mets versus the Phillies at 7 p.m. on ESPN.
Esports.
A few big tournaments this weekend. The Counter-Strike DreamHack Masters Spring 2021. Boy, they really need to come up with catchier titles for these tournaments. But again, the Counter-Strike DreamHack Masters Spring 2021 with a $250K purse is happening all weekend. And then Riot's Valorant VCT Challengers Finals is going down on May 2nd for $101K. No small purse there. And then this tournament really blows our minds. The 2021 Free Fire Worlds Series in Singapore has a $2 million purse. And you're like, okay, well, what game is that? I've never heard of Free Fire either, but apparently it's a Fortnite clone for iOS and Android. A $2 million purse, WTF. All right, thanks for checking out 3-Night Weekend on Sifted Games at sifted.net. A huge thanks to Jason Schreier. I really enjoyed talking to him. He provided a lot of insight into his important work in games journalism, and we really, really appreciate it. If you want to get it when it's hot and fresh, head to patreon.com/sifted and give us a pledge. If you give us $4 a month or more, you'll get this every Friday morning. If you want to know when the show is posted for free, follow us on Twitter at Sifted Games. And if you want to reach out to me and suggest future guests, you can find me at Dinfire. I'm Shane Satterfield reminding you that every weekend is a 3-Night Weekend.